Welcome back to the table, friends. I'm your humble host, GreyDMS, and with me, as always, is Owen.
Hi there.
So, Owen, I believe you have another wonderful topic to share with us today.
Yeah, I do. So, imagine a version of Dungeons & Dragons where character creation takes 5 minutes, treasure is the main source of XP, and your level 1 wizard has exactly one spell, which they'll probably use to knock out a goat by accident.
Sounds like a personal anecdote.
Welcome to the old school Renaissance.
Ooh.
This was tabletop role-playing back when monsters were in random tables, maps were drawn on graph paper, and your dungeon master's greatest joy was asking, "Are you sure you touch it with your bare hands?" Today, we're diving into the OSR, a movement that brought old-school gaming back from the dead, dusted it off, and said, yeah, this looks deadly and poorly balanced. Let's print it.
Deeply for those who deserve their punishment deep inside, and they know that the dungeon master must give it to them each and every session.
Yes. And there really is nothing better than, "Are you sure you want to do that?" And then hearing yes.
All right. Let me get the dice.
All right. So what is old school and why the revival? By the mid-2000s, many tabletop gamers felt a yearning for the style and spirit of early role-playing games from the late 1970s and early 1980s, especially the original Dungeons & Dragons. Newer editions of D&D, like 3rd edition and later, had become more complex and rules-heavy. Gamers nostalgic for the looser, imagination-driven play of the 1974 through 1985 era began gathering online to discuss a possible old-school renaissance. Early forums posts as far as back as 2004 speculated that an old-school renaissance could be on the horizon as an antidote to overly crunchy modern games. A pivotal enabler for the OSR was Wizards of the Coast Open Games License, which we've talked about several times. This was released in 2000. The OGL allowed anyone to use the core rules of D&D 3rd edition to create new content legally. Importantly, this opened a loophole. Fans could reverse engineer older editions of D&D using the OGL. As one early OSR commenter noted, the basic foundation of everything that has been accomplished by the OSR is Wizards' open game license for 3.0, 3.5 D&D, because it gave fans the tools to publish old school rule sets for free. In other words, the OGL made it possible to legally recreate the classic game mechanics that were long out of print, and people did exactly that. Prior to the OSR taking off, there are already pockets of old school fans on forums like Dragon's Foot, focused on 1st edition AD&D, and Knights and Knaves Alehouse, keeping the old ways alive. These were just enthusiasts playing older games, but around 2005-2006, their efforts became more coordinated. The term old school renaissance itself gained traction by 2008 as a shorthand for the burgeoning movement. It wasn't a top-down initiative by any company, but a grassroots convergence of many projects. Looking back, OSR historian Robert Connolly noted that the OSR grew out of uncoordinated efforts of a diverse crowd of gamers. No one group or entity dominates the OSR. In short, it was a fandom-driven revival rather than a corporate product line. Man, isn't that nice?
Yeah, like it makes sense too, because a lot of people, like a lot of the urge from this probably came from people trying to recapture their experiences at a
the magic of their first time playing.
And that's not like a centralized effort.
No.
That's like them going like, well, yeah, but my table also homebrewed this little bit, so that should be in there.
And that is going to become a main point of this. There's going to be a lot of homebrew, a lot of, hey, it's, how did they say it? This is the ruling, not the rule.
Mm. And that's another thing, too, that I think a lot of people who may have come to TTRPGs later than we did, and like even us, probably don't understand as much as you hear a lot about dungeon masters and tables having a pretty significant chunk of homebrew.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's as prevalent today, aside from problematic ones.
Right.
Because, like, there's probably a little bit, like, we have it. But a lot of this was necessary to fix the rules of like, the original D&D and, like, the original stuff of, like,
the fast and loose stuff.
Yeah, like, patching in, like, hey, this is how we've adjudicated this. So get used to this packet to bring you in line with this. And that's probably something to note in this.
Yep. So in 2004, Castles and Crusades by Trollf Lord Games attempted to recapture AD&D's feel using a simplified D20 system. While not a direct clone of an older edition, it showed the appetite for rules-light classic-style gameplay. Notably, Matt Finch, a future OSR leader, worked on Castles and Crusades, as an editor. This game's modest success hinted that a market for old-school style games existed even before the OSR movement fully crystallized. So, one thing that defines OSR games isn't just when the rules originated, but how they play. OSR is often described more as a playstyle philosophy than a specific rule set. Here are the key design tenets that OSR games embrace. Rulings, not rules. This mantra sums up OSR's approach to gameplay. Instead of exhaustive rulebooks covering every situation, the game master is empowered to make judgment calls on the fly. As OSR designer Matthew Finch put it, most of the time in old-style gaming, you don't use a rule, you make a ruling. The players can describe any action. The referee uses common sense to decide what happens, and then the game moves on. This creates a flexible, fast-paced game where creativity trumps rule lawyering. The focus is on the immediate fictional situation, not consulting a rule for each corner case.
Oh man, like you can almost feel the sprouting divergence between the people who ultimately led to something like Traveler.
Yeah.
Where they were like, no rulings, hard, concrete, like, and then the group that was like, that you can't infinitely do that. You have to come up with some sort of...
book ends up becoming, a Bible, it's so thick.
It becomes fatal.
Yes. Another one of the rules, player skill and agency. Old school games put challenges to the player, not just the character sheet. There are often no skills or abilities that guarantee success. You have to describe your approach and outwit obstacles. Problem solving, clever tactics, and ingenuity are encouraged over relying on die rolls for every task. If there's a trap, the OSR GM expects the player to ask, I prod the floor with a pole, or we pour water down to see if the pit has an invisible floor, rather than just rolling a perception check. This gives players a strong sense of agency. Their choices matter at every turn. High challenge, high risk. OSR gameplay is famously dangerous and unpredictable. Characters in these games tend to be fragile at low levels. A single sword thrust or failed saving throw can kill. Save or die mechanics in an XP for treasure reward system are common, which incentivizes cautious exploration and clever avoidance of combat. The tone is often one of wonder and danger in equal measure. This doesn't mean OSR games are about the GM versus players. Rather, it's about embracing risk and consequences. Though I personally do enjoy GM versus players, or more popularly, players versus GM. Victory feels earned because the odds are often stacked against you. As one review quipped about the tone of OSR dungeon crawls, Labyrinth Lords feels like a Vietnam War movie, where the dungeons are dark, wet, and terrifying. Goblins murder all your friends, and you start to develop a 1,000-yard intravision stare from the spell shock. A stark contrast to the more heroic power fantasy vibe of modern games. Now, specifically, that quote is about a game called Labyrinth Lords, which is its own creature.
That is like the most beautiful statement to like show how this isn't 5th edition.
Yes.
Like,
there's no hand holding.
How
there's
else
no...
could I tell you this?
Yeah.
You're half-orc, star-crossed barbarian, hexblade warlock who has a tragic past and ultimately will become prince of a kingdom, compared to a Vietnam vet who's seen too many of his friends die of goblins. These are two different systems.
Yes.
Oh my God.
Yes, going through this, I very much want us to play one of these.
It's definitely going on the books.
Yes. All right. Next, simplicity in DIY ethos. OSR rules tend to be rules light and easy to modify. Many OSR games intentionally use simple mechanics, often based on 1970s D&D, specifically so that GMs and players can house rule and tinker to their liking. This DIY ethos, doing it yourself, is core to the old school spirit. You won't see elaborate character build options or rigid balance in these games. Instead, you'll see tables of random encounters, treasure generators, and GM guidelines that encourage making the game your own. Hackability is considered a feature, not a flaw. Every campaign might use slightly different rules, and that's embraced as part of the fun. Emergent storytelling. Rather than scripting an epic plot, OSR adventures often start with a simple premise such as there's a dungeon rumored to hold great treasure, and let the story emerge through play. Sandbox worlds, open-ended settings with multiple hooks are popular. The idea is that the narrative develops organically from player decisions and the chaos of dice, often leading to surprising outcomes. This stands in contrast to heavily plotted adventures. An OSR session might feel less cinematic, but more authentically unpredictable. Much like the earliest RPG sessions in Gygax's Greyhawk or Arneson's Blackmoor.
God, this is like hitting so many points. Like, because these are really brilliant parts of the discussion about the hub. Like, because this is like literally the crux of that, like that topic that we've talked about, how in our own personal gaming, whether it's online or like, you know, at the table, like where we talk about those stories that we did, that like our favorite stories, and none of them really come from the GM's plot.
No,
man,
they're just things that the players thought would be cool.
Yeah,
and
like
fun.
like the things that we've talked about, advice of like, hey, a player picked up a plot thread and they said, "This is mine, and I want this."
Yeah,
and getting into it, that still all holds true. But I'm still thinking to all those like the like, you know, the Forsaken Guild trip that we did for Shadowfang, and like and like wow, like you like once again, sandbox kind of situation, has nothing to do with the what's the plot of the game that we were playing, which was WoW at the time. It was all about like us players doing weird stuff, and how like us coming across that dwarf and like talking about it for years afterwards, like the confusing dwarf who got jumped by a bunch of people that were 10 levels lower than him.
Yeah.
You know, like it's that thing, it's that emergent storytelling, and like that becomes such a much of a more visceral memory than like the book of 5th edition plot that you read from Wizards of the Coast. Man, I'm having like a crisis here. Like, this is good. Okay.
Yeah. So these philosophies, collectively try to recapture the feeling of the earliest RPGs, when things were less polished, a bit more perilous, but brimming with creative freedom. In an OSR game, anything might be attempted by the players, and the rules won't get in the way of a good idea. As an ethos, it's about returning to the hobby's roots to restore the same sense that anything can happen in a session, for better or worse. And yeah, I don't think this is pertinent to just you and I, but when we talk about World of Warcraft, we talk about the first 2-3 expansions and how great that was, and the experiences that we got, and how unpolished the game was.
Yeah. And like even a better example is probably when we were playing on Soulforge, the Neverwinter Nights server.
Yeah, Persistent World.
Because server. there was no overarching plot.
No.
But like all those detailed stories, whether they were RP or not.
Right.
Like that we hold true, in which listeners probably have the same thing. Like you're playing Call of Duty with your friends in college, or you're at some LAN party, like those visceral experiences that's what's happening at the table in these games is like a bunch of people trying to figure out how to send an infinite amount of goats into the trap to trigger it so they can get past it, instead of like coming with a backstory of like handing it to the GM and like implement this story for me.
Yeah.
And like take my character from point A to point B. Like in our big game, like Drake, you know, specifically like his character, like, you know, he developed his character and his backstory that didn't quite, like, it's been fit in. And there's a bunch of stuff
it's been hammered into place.
Yeah. And like, there's a bunch of stuff that I think would be super wonderful if you guys went down to and explored it and all that. That's not the point of, but what I'm saying is like, this is the antithesis to that. This is saying that like, no, you know, like you should not have any of that because like the emergent gameplay is what you will all care about more. So all the stuff that happened after your character showed up is the stuff that is going to be remembered in the far future fondly.
Right.
Not the manufactured plot that you had. And I don't, to let me clear a point, I don't think either one is correct. I think they're two valid things.
They're both tools that have their own use.
Yes, because this, which maybe we'll talk about at the end, this has a very high potential to murder, hobo, fuck around.
Oh, yeah.
But it also scratches an itch that the other can't. So this is very interesting.
Yeah, if you have a very open, creative group, this seems like a very perfect thing.
Yeah, it's like the weirdest thing of like the character development almost happens after you've played the game, because now you're like justifying like what did that character turn into, and the other way is like, oh, all my character development happened before level 1.
Yeah,
and like somewhere in the middle is probably the best way to play.
Yeah, it's those people that show up to the table and just be like, yes, I was a general in an army, and it's just like crazy. You're level 1.
No, you're not.
But again, these, I want to reiterate, these are just loose rules for OSR type games, that they're not all like this. There are many out there. You can make your own. Like this, there's just things that exist.
It's just a philosophy.
Yes, it's a philosophy. So let's look at some of the popular OSR games, the better known ones. They kind of collectively call many of these retro clone RPGs. And they were mainly made to kind of emulate early editions of D&D. So first one we're going to look at is Osric. It was made in 2006. It stands for the Old School Reference and Index Compilation. And it was first released as a free PDF in 2006, and Osric recreated the rules of first edition AD&D under the OGL. Its purpose was explicitly to give publishers a legal tool to make new modules for AD&D styles of play. Compiled by Stuart Marshall with input from Mark Finch, Osric provided this whole retro clone idea was viable. It's essential AD&D 1E with, excuse me, that didn't make sense. It's essentially AD&D 1E with a new coat of paint, and it quickly became one of the most successful D&D retro clones. Over 20 small publishers produced 500 plus Osric-compatible adventures and supplements in the years that followed, effectively creating a new ecosystem for a 1970s game. Osric's release is often cited as the birth of the OSR movement in publishing terms. Basic Fantasy RPG, 2007, written by Chris Gonnerman. Basic Fantasy is a clone of the 1981 Basic and Expert D&D rules, released just a year after Osric. Notably, it was first distributed as a free PDF and printed cost book, emphasizing accessibility. Basic Fantasy made a few modern tweaks like ascending armor class and separating race from class, but is largely compatible with old modules. It was one of the first OSR games available and demonstrated the DIY spirit. It's open source with fans contributing to its development. Basic Fantasy showed that fans didn't have to wait for a big company to revive old D&D. They could do it themselves and even improve on things that along the way. Labyrinth Lord, 2007. That same year, Daniel Proctor of Goblinoid Games released Labyrinth Lord, a polished clone of the 1981 Moldve Cook Basic and Expert D&D. Do you know about the different versions of the initial Basic and Expert D&D?
I think we talked about it briefly because if you're going to go over that, I don't know.
No, go ahead.
Well, okay,
Please.
so the very first version that was created was the three cover book thing, or the three the foldable books that were stapled together that was in a box.
Mm-hmm.
And then from there, the company said, wait a second, we need to, they made the basic, they made the official
Basic D&D.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then they were like, oh, so they started making the advanced set, which was basically where they put the rules in, and then they had this concept that there were two versions of play, which was advanced D&D,
yep,
and the basic set, which was thought to be introductory and would get people into it.
Mm-hmm.
And then by second edition, they got rid of the basic set, and they were like, no, AD&D, because they started calling stuff AD&D, advanced D&D, and then they're advanced D&D second edition, and then that was just it.
Yep. Yeah, for the most part, that's it. In the very early versions, you had the Holmes Basic D&D, which is 1977. TSR hired Eric Holmes, developed Basic D&D game. Those were the dark blue box sets, and it just had a single book plus a module, and that's some dice, cardboard, chits, that kind of stuff. Then you had the Moldve Basic D&D, where Tom Moldve revised Basic D&D in 1981, and this is when they started the red box, the one probably a lot of people are a bit more familiar with. Yes.
When they did in 5th edition, they did a reprinting of 5th edition as the red box.
Yep. And the rules for the Moldve Basic were for levels 1 through 3. And then David Cook wrote the follow-up expert rules, which were 4 through 14. And then you had the Menser revised game, which was from 1983, continued with the red box. And this was basically just a revised version of the Moldve set. And then it came with basic and expert. And then they'd include additional expansions, Companion, which is from 15 to 25, Master, which is 26 through 36, and Immortal, characters too sexy for their level. But yeah, that's that.
And so I think there's two main points that you need to understand in this, not how many versions there were, but one of them was that because there was this because this didn't exist,
right?
And there was this misunderstanding sometimes, or they were attempting to understand where this existed. There's a lot of viewing this game as a board game to be put on shelves with other board games. And that's kind of how a lot of people viewed at it. That's where it ended up a lot.
Yeah. Was
next to the board. That's why it's a box set.
Sit next to Monopoly.
Yeah, because they didn't have that idea of game, game RPG shelves, So this is them figuring that out. The second thing is, as a result of that, this deeply added into this concept of this being archaic knowledge, or not, it's not archaic. It's the word strange, hard to come by. Esoteric knowledge. So that when you showed up to a table, you got introduced to their version of this.
Yeah.
However they got it, that was the version that you knew from your childhood.
Right.
And so that's where a lot of tribalism and a lot of basically what we're probably going to hear about, people going to these other versions came from, because they're no, this is the experience we had because we had these books.
Yep. Yeah. And it's funny to me, again, we're older, but we're not old enough to have been around when D&D first came out in the early versions and stuff like that. But I just imagine, like you said, they were putting this next to the board games, and I'm just thinking of a Milton Bradley commercial where she's like, come on kids, let's play D&D. And, I attacked the orc with my dagger. Ooh, you stabbed it through the eye and punctured its brain. It's dead. Yay.
Pretty much. They're like, this, like, for anything anybody ever produces, there's all these people in a room going, how can we market this to people?
Yeah.
And this had to be one of them that, like, we're confused. I love the concept of some unknowing family pulling that off the shelf, taking it home, thinking they're going to play Monopoly.
Oh, God.
And they're reading these rules and they're like, this is a lot more than there's a lot we have to keep track.
How'd you guys do with that, what was it called? That D&D game that you played? It took us 3 nights.
Consequently, our lives are now devoted by this, and our personalities of our children are forever changed.
We may have made a huge mistake. All right, so back to Labyrinth Lord. Significant for a couple of reasons. It was among the first retro clones to get wide recognition outside the immediate OSR fan base, and Goblinoid Games made most of its content under OGL for others to use. They even provided a free trademark license so others could publish compatible material easily. In other words, Labyrinth Lord actively encouraged a community of creators to expand on it. It quickly became a staple rule set for OSR campaigns, especially for those who started with the beloved Redbox era of D&D. Swords and Wizardry, 2008. As the OSR gained momentum, Matthew Finch, he was from Osric if you remember, wanted to clone the original 1974 D&D. He released Swords and Wizardry, a very rules-light take on OD&D, old D&D, in 2008. Swords and Wizards has been through a few printings and even won an Annie Award later on. Its white box variant, a super stripped-down version, is especially popular for those who want to really simple, almost DIY toolkit of D&D. Swords and Wizardry also came with Matt Finch's Quick Primer for Old School Gaming, a free booklet that articulates OSR principles like rulings, not rules, and is widely read in the OSR community. By releasing Swords and Wizardry, Finch demonstrated that even the oldest, quirkiest version of D&D could be revised for new audiences. It further cemented the OSR practice of keeping things rules light and flexible. This one's important. Lamentations of the Flame Princess.
Yes. Enough to earn an acronym.
Yes.
That many of you may know before you know the, yeah, like I did.
What is that acronym?
Lamentations of the Flame Princess?
Yes.
Is it LAMFP?
Yeah. LOTFP.
LOTFP. Like, it was one of those things that I had to, like, copy, paste, Google.
What is this?
What do people keep talking about this?
Yes,
and I was like, oh, Lamentations of the...
In 2010, James Edward Raggi IV, an American expat in Finland, published a game that would become both famous and infamous in OSR circles. Lamentations of the Flame Princess, or LOTFP, is essentially built on the basic and expert D&D chassis, but with a weird horror twist and an eye for avant-garde design. Raggi's game was heralded for its solid encumbrance system and innovative approach to the thief, amongst other things. But what really set it apart was the tone. Lamentations of the Flame Princess bills itself as weird fantasy role-playing and leans into shocking, often gory or adult-themed content. It came out as a shiny hardcover called the Grindhouse Edition in 2011 with professional art, showing that OSR games could look as good as any mainstream product. Lamentations of the Flame Princess's modules like Death, Frost, Doom, and Better Than Any Man push boundaries of horror and genre mixing into dungeon crawls. This game was a milestone in that it attracted people who normally might not play an old school D&D clone at all, drawn by the heavy metal aesthetic and outrageous scenarios. It proved OSR games didn't have to be purely nostalgic rehashes, they could carve out new thematic territory. The game also did have controversies, but we'll talk about those in a little bit.
I don't know if you realize, but Death, Frost, Doom? Does that sound familiar? That's the Halloween game we recorded.
Is it really?
That I translated it to 5th edition.
Oh.
That is the module that we played.
That's funny.
That's why, because that's where I'm trying to remember why I know this stuff. It was like, because I was looking at it then in that moment.
Yeah.
Because I like basic fantasy, I have those books, and I was looking up all this stuff to try to, because I don't know if you remember, of course, audience probably doesn't care about this, but we did the Tomb of Horrors.
Mm-hmm.
Like we brought out the advanced D&D stuff and we did that like around that time I was doing all the research to like, oh, let's bring in that kind of vibe back. And Death Frost Doom, like everybody was like, no, if you want to do a really screwed up game, do this one. It's like, high lethal.
Yeah.
Has that weird kind of surrealist, like you meet the crazy old man and, that was the module. It's where Jason pushed the dude in the well.
Yeah. My brother. So there's a few other notable ones, but I'm not going to get huge into them. But there's basic fantasy RPG. We did mention that a little bit earlier. Dark Dungeons, Dungeon Crawl Classics, which is very good. I've played a few of those. Adventure Conquer King System, or ACKS, and Old School Essentials, OSE. So by 2010 or so, you could see OSR rulebooks started to emulate virtually any edition of D&D, and they're all available legally and many times for free. The creation of these retro clones demonstrated the power of the OGL and the passion of the community to keep old school play alive. So let's look at some cultural impacts over time. So again, for some people, this might feel like a long time ago. For some of us, it doesn't feel like it was all that long ago. A lot of this is starting in the early 2000s. And some of us forget that in early 2000, the internet was not what it is now. And some of these things are going to sound very outdated, but for the time, they were top of the line, absolute easiest ways to get in contact and talk to people. So you had the zine scene. So these are e-magazines published online. So embracing its fanzine roots from the 1970s, the OSR spawned a vibrant zine culture. Small press homemade magazines full of adventures, new monsters, random tables, and fan art became a hallmark of OSR creativity. Two flagships OSR zines were Fight On, launched in 2008, and Knockspell, launched in 2008. Fight On especially was a big tent, hundreds of pages of content contributed by various OSR luminaries and newcomers alike. These zines were typically sold as PDFs or printed via print on demand, keeping costs low and accessibility high. Knockspell focused more on original D&D and Swords and Wizardry content, whereas Fight On covered all old school gaming broadly. By 2013, Fight On had released 14 jam-packed issues before taking a hiatus. According to Matt Finch, production values of zines are not slick, but they rocket with the DIY feel. And that DIY aesthetic was very much the point. Zines allowed anyone with an idea to get it out to the world, no corporate approval needed. Other notable zines included Dungeon Crawl Oubliette, a UK OSR zine, The Manor Crawl, and many more. The zine explosion mirrors the early days of RPGs when fanzines like Alariums and Excursions spread new ideas in the 1970s. It kept the OSR community fueled with a constant stream of fresh fan-made content. So now we're getting into the aesthetics. So visually, OSR products often harken back to the looks of early RPGs. Think black and white line art, the occasional blue dungeon map, and layouts reminiscent of old TSR modules. Early OSR rulebooks like Osric and Labyrinth Lord used this approach to reinforce the nostalgia. However, as the movement progressed, a strain of experimental art and graphic design entered the scene. For instance, the artwork in Lamentations of a Flame Princess products range from grotesque horror to psychedelic weirdness, breaking from the elf with the sword tradition mold. This spawned what some called the art punk wing of OSR. Products that are as much art book as game.
Like all the Mork Bork stuff now.
Actually, Mirk Bori is how it's pronounced.
Wow.
I had to look it up. Yes. So I'm like, I have no idea how to pronounce that, but yes.
No, like those If you haven't, if audience members, dear audience friends, if you guys haven't picked up one of those books, it's weird because you're like, oh, okay, this is a rules book, and you open it up and you're like, there is so much art
and it's awesome.
Yeah, it like so
disconnected.
Like it's basically like if that chaotic Mad Max person was like, I need to put rules down, smash my head against this lot, like, and you're just like, wow, like part of my
thoughts will bleed onto the page.
Part of my analytical brain is basically putting the chair and the rope up right now, trying to get away from this, but the artistic side's like, this is cool.
So, as an example, Mirk Borey, which features wild graphic design with neon colors and chaotic layouts, a far cry from the clean simplicity of the 1981 rulebook. There's been a deliberate embrace by some OSR creators of a punk zine aesthetic, hand-drawn illustrations, collages, and anti-establishment vibe, mixed with the polished technique of modern design tools. This diversity in art styles sometimes mirrors a cultural split, traditionals versus avant-garde. But broadly, it means the OSR has developed its own recognizable visual culture. From Peter Mullen's classic style illustrations in Sword and Wizardry to Zach Smith's quirky cityscapes and Vornheim to Avery Lockhart's vibrant layout and Murders and Acquisitions, OSR art runs the gamut, but always carries a bit of that indie spirit.
Yeah, it's really weird because that now that makes sense why it exists.
Yeah.
But like when I ran into it, it felt so counter to the spirit of like the tome. Like this is like especially like Vampire Requiem.
Yeah.
Like the polished tome book filled with information. And then all of a sudden you're saying, oh, this really hot game that's coming out is in this like 30-page pamphlet thing with splashes everywhere. And like the dissonance of like trying to put those, but now it makes sense because these are the people, they're creative, they're envisioning the system,
putting their twist on everything.
Yeah, it's very interesting. The other thing I want to bring up too, which was kind of cool because it hit to our previous point, is I backed Mothership. Like we have a copy of that.
We're going to mention that in a little bit too.
The ASCII GameFAQ aesthetic is like so deep inside my heart. I was like, I love this.
I've missed this.
A trifold ASCII. Oh my. I don't know why I was like obsessed with that. Anyway.
So again, we're gonna date some things here in a minute. So we're gonna talk about some of the community platforms. So the gathering places of the OSR community have shifted with the internet trends. In the 2000s, it was blogs and forums. In the 2010s, a huge hub became Google+. Of
course.
The OSR community somewhat famously flocked to Google+, as its circles feature allowed for semi-private discussions and was relatively easy to share blog posts and content. From around 2012 to 2018, Google+ was arguably the center of OSR networking. Game designers, writers, and fans all connected there, forming groups, running games, and collaborating. When Google Plus shut down, it was a blow to that mode of community. But OSR folks dispersed to new realms. Some went back to blogs, many moved to Discord servers, others to MeWe, which I had never heard of, or Reddit. In recent years, itch.io, a platform for indie games, has also become important. Through all these shifts, a few anchor sites remain. For instance, the Dragon's Foot Forum, founded in 1999, continued to host AD&D discussions and free fan modules, and the OD&D 74 Pro Boards forum catered to the original D&D aficionados. The key takeaway is that the OSR community has been decentralized but highly networked. Wherever they gather, the ethos of sharing content freely or cheaply are encouraged and DIY creation stays strong. As one account put it, the games are supported online by various forums and blogs, sometimes collectively referred to as the OSR. In other words, the community itself is an integral part of what OSR means. The OSR's DIY publishing streak found a natural ally in Kickstarter and other crowdfunding platforms. Many OSR projects that might have struggled to find traditional publishers turned to Kickstarter to fund print runs and art. Starting around 2012, we see OSR publishers succeeding in crowdfunding. For example, Dungeon Crawl Classics had a Kickstarter for a deluxe reprint. Altart funded Adventure Conquer King. Gavin Norman funded Old School Essentials, a very successful 2019. And more recently, Shadow Dark RPG, a new school OSR hybrid, raised over $1 million. Kickstarter also launched Zine Quest in 2019, an annual event each February where RPG creators create small zine format games or supplements. This injected new energy and new faces into the zine scene. Suddenly, dozens of new RPG zines, often OSR flavored, were getting funded each year. Crowdfunding allowed products to find their audience globally. A great example is Myrk Bori. It started as a small project by two Swedish designers and through Kickstarter gained international attention, delivering a stylish 90-page book after an incredibly successful Kickstarter in 2019. The result is that OSR products now often have high production values, fancy hard-covered box sets, cool extras, funded by the fans who want them rather than by corporate investments. It's the community's direct voting for what they want to see. In the past few years, I mentioned it before, itch.io has become a hotspot for OSR and OSR adjacent games. Itch.io is very creator friendly, allowing anyone to upload PDFs of their games and sell or give them directly to consumers. A lot of the more experimental or rules light descendants of OSR design, sometimes tagged as NSR, New School Revolution, are on itch. As of now, hundreds of games and supplements on itch carry the OSR tag, from traditional dungeon modules to offbeat hacks. It's become an accessible way for new creators who might not run a blog or print zines to distribute their work. Community-organized game jams on itch, such as the OSR Jam or a Dungeon Jam, prompt designers to create themed content within a time frame, further fueling creativity. The platform also skews towards a younger international crowd, bringing new voices into the OSR fold who might not have been on the old Google Plus platforms. So now, what we all love, controversies. So, no movement is without its growing pains and disputes, and the OSR is no exception. While largely positive and created, the OSR scene has had its share of controversies and ideological rifts over the years. It's important to touch on these, not to dwell on drama, but to understand how the community has changed and responded. One of the first big divides in the OSR came with the 2008 release of Supplemental V, Carcosa, written by George McKinney. Carcosa was a weird science fantasy setting for original D&D that included some very dark and graphic elements like Lovecraftian rituals involving human sacrifice. Its publication, originally as a fan supplement, caused an uproar in the otherwise collegial OSR circles. Some fans loved the fresh take on Pulp, Sword, and Planet meets Cthulhu and saw it as an exciting extension of old school gaming. Others were deeply uncomfortable with its content, finding it gratuitous or against the spirit of D&D. This led to the beginning of the first major rift in the old school community between those who thought that Carcosa and the Lamentations of the Flame Princess line in general were breaths of fresh air, and those who thought them a bridge too far. In other words, a cultural schism emerged. Should OSR stick to the classic, lighthearted fantasy tone, or is it okay to push into grimdark horror and adult territory? James Raggie's work, Lamentations of the Flame Princess, only amplified this debate by consistently publishing edgy material. This controversy was never fully resolved. Rather, it signaled that the OSR was diversifying in tone. Different camps formed. Some focused on family-friendly nostalgia, others on psychedelic metal or horror interpretations. The Carcosa incident is often referenced as a turning point where the OSR community realized not everyone agreed on what old school should feel like.
Never underestimate people's ability to like form tribes.
Yes, as soon as there's more than one person. Unfortunately, some of the OSR's prominent early figures brought conflict with them. Two names often cited are Zach Smith, also known as Zach S., aka Zach Sabbath, and the RPG Pundit, whose real name is Casimir Urbanski. Both are talented creators. Zach wrote acclaimed products like Vorenhelm and a Red Pleasant Land, and Pundit was behind games like Lion and Dragon. Both gained notoriety for aggressive online behavior. Zach, in particular, was a polarizing presence. Initially welcomed for his DIY D&D creativity and unique perspective, he was an artist and an adult film actor, bringing an outside vibe. He later clashed with many in the community. He had a tendency to exchange in flame wars and was accused of harassing other members online. Matters reached a head in February 2019 when 4 women, including his former partner, publicly accused Zach of abusive behavior and sexual misconduct. The allegations were detailed and disturbing, and virtually the entire RPG community reacted by cutting ties with Zach. As one recap noted, the entire RPG community, people who can't normally agree about anything, kicked Zach to the curb.
Can we just take a moment? Do we all agree on this?
Yes. He was banned from many forums and publishers ceased selling his work. This was a watershed moment. The OSR community and the broader RPG world engaged in serious reflection about harassment, safety, and the kind of people elevated in this scene. James Raggi, who had been Zach's main publisher, initially issued a half-measure statement, but ultimately had to distance Lamentations of the Flame Princess from Zach as well. The Zach S. controversy left a scar on the OSR community. Some felt the OSR brand had been tainted by association. It also heightened an internal tension. There was a perceived strain of gatekeeping and abrasive old-school elitism, and some OSR corners, often tied to a few personalities. Once Zach was ousted, there was a push by many to make the community more welcoming and inclusive going forward. In the aftermath of those events, parts of the community sought to rebrand or redefine OSR to break from what they saw as toxic aspects. One initiative that sprang up, called Sword Dream, this is a little weird, it's a play on OSR, as in old school Renaissance. If you move each letter one forward, O turns into P, S turns into T, and R turns into S, and then you add the D on dream, it spells PTSD. So instead of calling it old school Renaissance Dream, they just changed it to Sword Dream. I know it's
a
journey. A stretch. I don't know, but yeah.
I thought I was following you. Okay.
Yes.
Sword Dream.
Yes. Sword Dream's proponents emphasize diverse creators, inclusivity, and moving beyond the baggage of the term OSR. It largely took root on platforms like itch.io and Twitter. However, as one observer noted in late 2019, Sword Dream is mostly an itch.io phenomenon, and the term art punk for the avant-garde wing hasn't really caught on widely. In essence, Sword Dream was a sort of splinter movement saying, we're doing the same kind of games but explicitly rejecting gatekeeping and sexism. Not everyone in OSR liked this, of course. Some felt it was unnecessary or accusatory. On the flip side, another tongue-in-cheek faction emerged called #BrosR.
What?
#BrosR. Bros are. I don't know.
This is fascinating.
Yes. But as you can probably guess, they embraced a macho, back to Gygax persona, often ironically. These subcurrents reflect an ideological divide. Should the OSR remain a big tent labeled as OSR, or was the brand so damaged by a few bad actors that new labels were needed? As of 2025, OSR is still the prevalent term, but you'll also hear OSR adjacent, neo-OSR, and NSR being used by various groups to signal their specific approach to distance themselves from others. For instance, NSR was proposed as inclusive, no purity test, just a just a brief list of stuff to help find games that match your taste with old school style.
No purity test?
No purity test. Yes.
I don't think I want to know.
No. Essentially describing the playstyle without the baggage of the term OSR. Next, we hit the edition war. So the OSR also, by its nature, had a bit of a countercultural stance relative to the official D&D line. In the late 2000s, when D&D 4th edition came out, many old schoolers really disliked it, finding it too video game-like, for example. This fed an us versus them mentality in some discussions. OSR fans sometimes portrayed as grognards who think no game past 1985 is worth playing. Meanwhile, fans of modern games might dismiss OSR as nostalgia for archaic design. These edition war undercurrents flared up on forums like nworld and RPG.net. Occasionally, notably, Wizards of the Coast in 2012 reprinted premium editions of the first edition AD&D books, and later made PDFs of old editions available. Some say this was partially due to seeing the OSR's popularity and keeping those editions alive. By D&D 5th edition, Wizards even hired Zach Smith, an RPG pundit, as consultants during development. Apparently no one told them. This decision became controversial once Zach's issue came to light. Wizards eventually publicly disavowed Zach. In general, the mainstream D&D community and OSR community have grown closer in recent years. 5e's more streamlined rules appealed to some old-school gamers, but a bit of tribalism persisted. It's fair to say that OSR spent its first decade somewhat defined in opposition of the direction of official D&D, though now it's more just one flavor of the wider RPG hobby.
Yeah, wow. That's impressive.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I realized one of the reasons that a lot of that stuff happened when I was going back to college.
Yeah.
That 12 to 18 is like almost exactly when I was in school.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why, like, I guess, because I remember like getting into it when I first went back, being like, oh, hey, we need to play, some of this stuff. So I was like,
yeah, I remember at that time there was a big push from you.
And like we were getting pieces of it. Like when Wizards, when you said like they reproduced, like they had these fake leather bound versions of the previous editions. Mm-hmm. Like I picked up all the AD&D stuff. The second edition stuff I couldn't get a hold of, which is now the only edition that I don't have on the shelf. But then, so I had like the paperback basic fantasy books and stuff, and I was like, cool, well, we got this, and then I think we got like, there's another 2-book set that was like hardcover, but it's kind of the same thing. And I was like, oh man, we got all this stuff, we can go do it whenever we want to. And then like, like 5th edition just was easier to run. Yep. And so like I ran it until we popped back up and, after college. And then it was like, oh, now there's a lot of weird stuff and I'm confused. And this now is like putting all the pieces together.
Yep.
Makes sense.
Now you're understanding why all that stuff popped up. So last few bits here, we're going to talk about the influence of OSR on modern indie RPGs. Perhaps poster child for OSR's crossover appeal, Merc Bori is a rules-light, art-heavy, apocalyptic fantasy RPG from these writers in Sweden that takes the RPG world by storm. It's often described as a doom metal album of a game. The book is neon yellow, filled with unsettling illustrations, and presents a dying world beset by misery. Mechanically, it's very much grounded in OSR tradition. Simple stats, random character generation, high lethality, dungeon crawling basics. In fact, Merc Bori explicitly calls itself a game in the OSR genre, but it pairs those mechanics with an extreme art punk presentation and tone that feels utterly fresh. It showed that OSR-style games can break into the mainstream, and it won multiple Emmy awards and spawned a huge community of fan-made content because the publisher released an easy license for third-party modules. Knave, 2018. It's a minimalist fantasy RPG by Ben Milton, known for Questing Beast YouTube channel. It distills D&D down to bare bones. There are no classes, just 6 ability scores and some equipment. Knave is designed to be highly compatible with OSR material. You can run classic modules with it easily, but it strips away a lot of the rules baggage. It exemplifies the rules toolkit approach. It's only about 7 pages of actual rules, encouraging groups to add or tweak as needed. Knave's significance lies in how widely it's been adopted and remixed. It became a go-to introductory OSR game because it's so easy to grasp. Karn, 2001. Karn by Yochai Gal is a recent fantasy RPG that builds on ideas from Knave and another game called Into the Odd. It's a forest fantasy game about explorers and a mysterious wood, but mechanically it's a marriage of OSR principles with modern design. Karn uses slot-based inventory where each item takes up a slot, a concept from Knave, and has no classes, but it borrows the resolution system from Into the Odd, a 2014 game by Chris McDowell, which itself is considered OSR-ish. The result is a game that feels very old school, exploration, deadly combat, creative problem solving, yet is streamlined and elegant by modern standards. Troika, 2018. It's a wild science fantasy RPG from the UK that has become a darling of the indie scene. It is often lumped in with OSR because of shared community and conventions, though it's actually based on the mechanics of Fighting Fantasy, the 1980s solo gamebook series and RPG. Troika features a gonzo setting with strange backgrounds, character types like a golden barkentine or a lactomancer, and a unique, I don't think it's what you think it is, but it's just milk, and a unique initiative system using tokens drawn from a bag.
Troika's a character on The Boys or something. There's the super dude's like, I have the power over milk. And everybody's like, that's a stupid power. And then he like kills the senator or something because they drank milk that morning.
I vaguely remember that. Is that from The Boys?
It's for one of the superhero shows.
Okay, yeah.
I think it's The Boys. I think then he gets his head exploded or something.
Yeah, probably. The connection to OSR through the UK OSR crowd, which is heavily influenced by the old Fighting Fantasy game books. Okay, here's just a couple quick ones. Into the Odd, Electric Bastion Land, Mothership, which you mentioned a little bit earlier, Blades in the Dark, and the Forged in the Dark games. And even D&D 5th edition took some inspiration from OSR sentiment. The advantage-disadvantage mechanic replaced many fiddly modifiers, and 5e's designers spoke about bringing back a sense of danger reminiscent of earlier editions. So yeah, there you go. So overall, the OSR community is in a healthier place than ever before after facing challenges from toxic behavior and internal controversies. Creators and fans have consciously worked towards more inclusive, supported spaces. Today, the community thrives across multiple digital platforms, Discord servers, buzz with discussions, Reddit's r/OSR sees daily exchanges of creative ideas, and itch.io has become a bustling hub for indie OSR gamers. It's clear that the OSR has not only survived its growing pains, but emerged stronger and more unified. Dun, dun, dun. Very interesting, huh?
Yeah, like it's crazy because really what you just detailed is like kind of the evolution of RPGs.
Yeah.
Because we talk about
in a very short time frame.
Yeah, we talk about these big name companies that we've been talking about before that are like titans in the industry, but really they don't establish the culture.
No.
The culture is like with the fans, and you have this really weird mix over what we've just talked about of essentially two things that were kind of brooding. One was this group of people who wanted to play like they used to. And the other is what happens every time a group separates from the norm. You know, in this case, because they wanted to kind of go back to a previous method, then you get some young people who go in there because they're always looking to play counterculture, and they start redefining the culture. But they bring with them youthful artist like creation, and they start redefining things, which inherently leads to immediate like backlash. But like that's also where like a lot of culture gets evolved, because you need the youth to do it, because otherwise everybody's just like, no, I just want 30 years of doing it the way I used to, and then I'll die.
Do you know, the whole time I was doing this, the big thing that kept popping up in my brain was Christianity.
Oh.
And yeah, I know that's a weird tangent.
Sure. Let you cook.
But I mean, in the way that you just explained, where you're just like, yeah, so you have this group of people, and then a couple of them get a little bit different ideas, and they break off and they do their own thing. So each one of these is its own denomination. And every time that happens, younger people tend to get moved into it, and the whole thing changes. But the traditionalists are just like, no, this is our rigid, blah, blah, blah. This is the way we have to do it. And that next group is just like, no, we kind of think it should work like this, and blah, blah, blah. And eventually they kind of become their rigid thing, and they lock down their system, and blah, blah. And that's how you go from Catholicism to non-denominational Christians.
Yeah.
You know, like if you take a Catholic and take them to a non-denominational church that's usually got several people that grew up in many different religions, still Christianity, but different flavors of Christianity, and set them there, they're going to be like, this isn't a church. This is a get together of friends and people playing guitars. And why is there a band on stage? And
yes.
Am I hitting a spot there?
And maybe we need to go into that discussion. But 100% yes. There is I've talked with the stakeholders and most delicately about that, more earnestly about, but it is there is just a thing. There's a thing about saying, look, if you encounter something during your formative years, it feels more real.
Yeah.
And for the rest of your life, you are now kind of handicapped. Like, you can be a super creative person and you can innovate the rest of your life, but there is a sense that you are built and made for the period of time in which you were raised. Mm-hmm. And like,
you have a little bit of leeway back and a little bit of leeway forward, but eventually you're going to fall off that cliff.
Which is why, like, you need youth. You need new people to come up with new ideas. And you also need to be okay with, like, youth, yeah. So you need to be okay with them changing things and moving things forward, just as they need to be okay with you being slightly inflexible, as long as you're both staying in your kind of lanes. And the problem is when you breach the lane, when they say, like, you have to update, or when you say the world has to stay my way. Both those things can't happen. And this is like probably sail into a bigger discussion than we'll have today.
I know, because I'm just like, man, this has got a lot of political parallels as well.
But it's a truth of the world, is that
evolve or die.
Yeah, at some time you have to, like, accept that we are not vampires who get to live hundreds of thousands of years, and, like, the world is going to move past you. And it's your right to go kind of pull aside and say, I'm going to create my little place that I'm going to be in. And I want to put people at the table who want to share those experiences with me. And we will bring new people who want to see it. But, like, they need to understand that they're not going to change it because we're all here for a different reason.
Right.
And, like, to hear that whole narrative play out is very interesting.
Yeah.
And it's kind of why we have this landscape now where we have really crazy, like, trying to talk about TTRPGs in the current setting is very weird. And I think kind of nailing it down, there's a good example is of Mothership and the Aliens RPG. And I think this is kind of like my final kind of take on all this stuff. You have two products which are cherished. And, like, if you haven't seen them, I personally vouch that they're both really awesome products. One of them is done by a company with a lot. They bought the right to Alien. They created a robust RPG. They have access to all the background information. They can basically put out books detailing, like, Romulus, all the movies. They can do this really cool, faithful adaptation, big hardcover books, big, expensive kind of, like, the Bible on what this RPG should be, for lack of a better term. Then you have, like, I think a single developer who made Mothership, who basically created and took the spirit of the original Alien movie and made this lightweight, possibly truer. I mean, you can use an argument, like, to form. And, like, I have the special edition. It's literally like folded paper pamphlets, which look like they're from the companies involved. All the expansions are just stapled bound little books, which both hurts me and I love it at the same time, because I'm like, no.
You love the simplicity of it, but at the same time, you're just like, I want this to be like a big book I can display. And
everything needs to be put on the shelf. And like, it kind of can't be. But the point is, Both of those are valid expressions and valid ways to play the game. And you can have an opinion over which one is yours, or you can enjoy both. That's fine, but you got to really try to fight tribalism to say one of them's not right. Because all your critiques are true. The big Aliens game is corporate. It is what it kind of loses the commentary of a dark corporate future if it is corporate. At the same time, the other game too is very simplistic, like to play and lacks some of the depth of like if you want to get nitty gritty into the Alien.
Right.
And this microcosm, I believe, is the RPG landscape. Like people now have the ability to put lightweight RPG rule systems that are designed to tell a particular flavor of story.
Yeah.
And they're not the robust thing that will be able to tell any story. They're like, here's this really cool thing. And it's like a PDF and you pay $10 and you have an awesome time. And as long as you understand what it is and don't think it's something else, you will find yourself with an unlimited amount of rule systems to tell any story you want.
Yeah.
But by the same token, you can't criticize them in the way you would criticize like GURPS or Open 20, D20.
I mean, can you criticize GURPS?
I can always criticize GURPS. There's a system that needed a strong tribalism. The anti-GURPS League. Okay. I think as long as we've hauled back to my hatred of
the
system, we probably need to
feel complete.
Well, thank you, Owen. This was
no problem.
An interesting view at the landscape. And hey, read more Mjorky Borky. What is it?
Mirk Bori.
That's where we're going to end it.